Hello, thanks so much for joining us for our panel today about how to build a stronger relationship between security teams and development teams. We have a really great group of panelists with us today who are in the trenches doing this work and who have lots of thoughts on how to build these teams and relationships successfully. So I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. Sonia, could you kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sunny Moise. I'm a staff security advocate at Snyk, working the DevRel team. Really excited to be part of this panel today with you all.
Wonderful. Olaf?
Hi, thanks to Rachel for having us. My name is Olaf. I'm a technology advisor at CircleCI, one of the leading CI/CD platforms. And obviously, supply chain is a topic.
Yes, very much so. Christian, can you go next, please?
Yeah, of course, Rachel. Hello, everyone. Christian here from Docker. I work on Docker Scout and across Docker official images, Docker registry. So all things around like supply chain security. Happy to be here with this panel and with our audience today.
Wonderful. Kaylin.
Hi, I'm Kaylin Tricon. I am the VP of Marketing at Chainguard, where we are focused on securing the software supply chain. More importantly, we're focused on securing open source software, which I'm excited to talk about today with you all as you're experts in this space, both building and distributing and maintaining those projects.
Wonderful. And Eric, bring us home.
Hello, I'm Eric. Hello, everybody. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of GitGuardian.
Wonderful. And I'm Rachel Stevens. I work with Redmonk. We help advise on technology adoption trends, specifically from the point of view of the practitioner. So we are very excited to be part of this panel and looking forward to hearing all the things you all have to say. So I wanted to kick it off kind of where we started, or what was mentioned from Kaylin when you talked about open source security, because I think open source security is an interesting place in the news and like collective understanding of things right now, especially in the wake of the XZ attack. So I think open source security and dependency management and supply chain security are something that's really top of mind for a lot of organizations. One of the things I think is interesting about this is I think XC has probably for a lot of people just catalyzed however they think about open source, or like whatever you thought about open source prior to the attack is probably what has been amplified. So it's like if you're someone who's really into open source, you say, yes, this is something that it's so good that this was open so that we could all catch this. And if you're someone who's a skeptic, you're maybe like, oh, this is open source security. What are we going to do about this big problem? And so I would love to talk about just how are people thinking about open source security in general these days, and how are we going to make progress in terms of kind of getting everyone on the same page about what it means to have secure open source supply chains. Anyone want to take a stab?
I'm happy to start.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I think the XC attack gave us something else to talk about instead of constantly bringing up Log4j all the time. So in some ways, it's a different attack. But what we've seen since Log4j is just such an emphasis on securing open source. I mean, we're seeing things here in the United States, in Washington, where there are meetings at the White House on this topic and really moving forward regulation that can help advance the security of open source. We've seen foundations like the OpenSSF come to rise over the last few years. And really, they're doing a tremendous amount of work, not only to raise this issue up, but also find solutions and fund projects that are here to help solve this problem. And so when I look at something like XC, it kind of brings both the proliferation of open source and the fact that everybody's using it, and we all need to take that ownership to secure it if we're going to use it in our environment. But you pair that with the human element of security and development, which is, the maintainer was social engineered. And like they were, their person, what they were going through emotionally was also tapped into here. But we also can think about that on the reverse, as we're all building things. We are all striving to build great things, and bugs happen, security issues happen that we don't foresee. But it's really how we all kind of show up in that moment and say, okay, I'm using this component in the thing that I built. It's my responsibility to secure it. And I think we're all kind of stepping into that light right now. And there's really good discussion happening in our space, in our field, both in the United States, but globally on this topic.
Yeah, if I can add to this, I think for me, it's also a sure proof that about the success of open source. I mean, the fact that the impact is so huge and that people kind of like step back and realize like, oh crap, this is really this is a thing. And a long time ago, my gray hairs, I've been working on like e-commerce platforms, and we had like Drupal and all this kind of like very ancient stuff. But in that area, you also had these like towers that were falling over because somewhere in the bottom there was this plugin that everybody was using to extend upon, and then all of a sudden these things were like falling over. And yeah, we all experience these things, but we don't really realize that if there's like an actor on purpose or even like by accident creating such a thing, what the impact potentially can be. So yeah, wake up call, but wake up calls are coming every few years. So I think the interesting question is, how actionable can we become here?
Yeah, I think like, it was touched upon, right? I think the main difference between Log4Shell back in the day, I think almost 3 years ago, right? Almost 3 years. And this incident now is that back in the day it was a bug, right? It was a kind of like an oversight that didn't get caught in like implementation. There wasn't any harm intended when this bug was introduced, not knowingly. But with XZ, as Caitlin said, like it was really socially engineered over a long time. So that is, of course, open source is vulnerable to this kind of attack, but at the same time was also the open source ecosystem that discovered this, right? So it was someone working on open source trying to figure out like, why is something taking longer? Logging into kind of like my machine here. And then he kind of like started going down the debugging path and found this eventually. So like you can't say this is the fault of open source. We need to kind of strengthen the processes here and whatnot. Like open source is what makes this whole software industry work for us, for all of us, right? It's the foundation of what what all of our software is being built upon. And I think I'm much rather looking at like we will see many of these social engineering things over the future. And maybe some have already happened without us even knowing this, right? Like there's this whole area of like, have we even seen everything, or was this just the tip of the iceberg? But there was this one person who actually discovered it. So the hope is there that we have started to see processes and communities and like taking these kinds of things really seriously. And of course, you need to have like processes and institutions around this and make this more stronger. But yeah, I'm a big open source proponent myself, and like we wouldn't be where we are today without open source. So open source isn't the problem. I think it's part of the solution.
And I think it's so admirable to watch how quickly the community responded when that did come out. I mean, everybody was working to ensure that there was a fix and ensure that everybody knew, how to implement it, where they were affected. And I think, later on in this discussion, I think we're going to probably bring up the word SBOM, but there's some interesting stories there that came out of how, seeing SBOMs in practice, really just goes to show that all of the stuff we've been talking about with what feels like years now, we're starting to see those solutions though prove to be effective and prove to help people. So I totally agree with you, Christian. I think, open source it's going to fix security for us. It's going to help us raise that tide that we all talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize this on supporting maintainers and contributors in open source, and also to realize that sometimes they do actually work on several packages. Could be tens of hundreds projects at the same time. They're potentially doing it on their free time, or joining those projects to participate on their free time. And this is also where you were actually mentioning, Christian, more and more social engineering attacks that we've seen. We've seen it in the past, and it's quite tricky actually to discern and to catch up, because we've seen examples where the malicious actor will potentially spend time to push cosmetic changes or just look for good issues to fix, just to build up the trust. And you wouldn't see if potentially it would be a malicious actor that tried to push a payload or their piece of code for their own goods. Saying we've seen this kind of example in the cryptocurrency ecosystem to siphon potentially by a Bitcoin wallet and this kind of examples. Obviously the question of supporting the open source maintainers also is a big question around burnout and mental health as well. There's the questions that need to be raised as well.
Yeah,
So,
I just totally agree with Sonia. I think if you dig a bit deeper on the issue, you have like a big issue of maintainer burnout, and it's sometimes people feel it's like a little bit it's not close to security, but yeah, I think it's deeply something we should think about it. You have like maybe a handful number of people that are maintaining critical software, and yeah, they should definitely get recognition, be sponsored, and yeah, I think it's the stuff that's really interesting to see in this attack is like the social engineering worked also because yeah, you had a guy that they worked for a long time on the project, was maybe demotivated, and yeah, that increased the probability of the social engineering attack to work, and yeah, we should also care about that stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things here is that I think if it was like a closed source, like commercial vendor thing happening, people would probably much more like blame things. And now it's more like, okay, we need to fix this as a community, which I think is a great response that we see.
Yes, and that's actually the perfect segue to where I want to take this next. So necessarily like scanning is not going to pick up a social engineer, like SCA is not going to pick up like this was a socially engineered thing and there's something malicious in here, but there's going to be like traditional security practices that maybe start to tie into this. There's going to be tools and communities that tie into this. There's going to be a role for foundations. There's going to be a lot of different pieces that are going to need to start coming together in order to help us think about open source software supply chain security. So I'm wondering, can you give us a thought in terms of where do we need to be focusing some of our community investments? Is it in and around tools? Is it in and around foundations? Like, is it projects, frameworks? Like, where should we be spending some of our time and effort right now?
Caring for the people, like Eric mentioned. Like, yeah, technology can bring us so far, and awareness is already probably also there. But if you're tired and you're really burned out, then you can be aware. You can have all the tools in the world, but in the end, you just don't close the lock because you're tired or your mind is kind of somewhere else. So I think it's really like as a community or as people actually using all those open source tools to, yeah, let's call it what it is, spend money, spend people, spend more energy on those projects that we all kind of build on. Because I think it's not for free in the sense. It's too easy to say, okay, we can just use it because it's open source and it's free. We need to take care of the people that are actually building the foundations of what we're all kind of building upon, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I started my career as a data scientist and developers, and I saw like when I was a data scientist, and it's how I started GitGuardian, like developers putting AWS rootkeys in Jupyter Notebook just to deliver faster, and you had the pressure of delivering fast and deploying, and people were making security mistake just because they didn't get the education. Also, they did a lot of mistake with Git. Git was not mastered. They didn't understand that if you just delete a commit with a credential, the secrets stay in the history, like stuff like that. And definitely education and awareness is a way to help us to build more secure software and to help developers write more secure code when you think about it. And people talk about prioritization and remediation, but when you think about it, if you can prevent the leak to happen, it's the best prioritization or remediation possible. And you can achieve this only through education and awareness for people, like writing the software, using open source component. And at the end of the day, I think that's where we should aim for.
If we want to tie this back to XZ, right? There was just simply no automation in the world that could have prevented this. I think the question then quickly becomes, how do you react to such a thing? Like, how do you discover this? Where are you affected, and how do you remediate quickly, right? Like, and then the simplest thing to do in supply chain security is to always stay up to date. And that's kind of, you see this in many parts of our industry, right? You see this with Docker images, and I think Docker and Chainguard are doing what they can in that space with constant like updates and like encouraging everyone to keep their stuff up to date. That's the first number one thing. And then if you start to drill in, and that's the job that we as software providers are doing, is kind of checking the provenance of these things that move into these artifacts, right? It's on everyone's kind of, you need to be aware, you need to kind of be able to continuously check the supply chain. Where are these things coming from? Are they trustworthy? Are you actually getting what you're paying for, right? Like, it's like when you buy your cereal, like, or your coffee beans, right? Do you trust the organic seal on the box? And that may or may not bring us to SBOMs in a bit, but it really is all about like, where's my software coming from, and do I trust the publisher of that piece of software? Can I trust them? Can I verify the attestation that comes with this piece of software? Is this verifiable and trustworthy? And I think if you start there as an organization, that's already a big step towards becoming more secure. Stay up to date and verify your dependencies. I think that's a really good start.
If I can play devil's advocate here a little bit, Christian, I think because one of the distros that was not affected by XC was one of the distros that was not up to date as yet, right? So wouldn't be, I guess it's a little bit more gray. Like, we all agree that you should not run your 2-year-old unpatched software like a lot of enterprises do, but maybe moving super fast, like really updating to the latest and greatest, is also risky if you don't have the right tools. And here SBOM comes again, or the station or whatever, because it's a fact that not every company has all the latest tools in place to actually make sure that what they pull it through their pipelines is the right stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think in this particular case, a lot of people got lucky, right? Because it was so targeted, this attack, right? So it didn't actually affect Alpine, a lot of others, and it wasn't actually targeted towards the container use case that a lot of the people on this call are really worrying about. But yeah, you're right. Like, there's always this but. If I stay up to date, I might actually get the bugs that someone introduced, right? Like software bugs, not vulnerabilities, but bugs. Those things exist too. But you have your tests for that, right? So there is. I'm not saying that there is a perfect solution, but like getting towards more security, I think you kind of have to be up to date.
I second that. What Christian has said about staying up to date, the latest and greatest. That's a big messaging pillar for us at Chainguard, and something we really try to educate on. But it's a journey. And, I think that, some of the things we talked about, provenance, attestation, and, taking it back to the question of like, what are organizations and vendors doing in this space? Like, the OpenSSF has done a lot of work. They help with Project SigStore, which is a great technology, open source technology to help with signing and verifying. There's also the SALSA, supply chain levels for software artifacts, great name, really tough acronym. But that kind of walks you through. And, I feel bad. I was part of that naming, so that's on me. But like, that walks you through the different levels and gives folks at least a baseline place to start as we think through this problem, and how do we get from where we are today to a future where, I would love to see people running the latest and greatest. And when something like XC happens, we're able to quickly update and move beyond it. But Olaf, you also make a great point. I don't know if we're ever going to get out of the trade-off game here in the space that we're all in.
I think Christian made a good point with the testing. Like, I've got a background in the Canary progressive delivery area, and obviously having tools that allows you to kind of put the right infrastructure in place and test for all the obvious exploits, that already helps a lot, of course, to make sure that you can turn back to an earlier version or whatever. But again, lots of tooling that you need to get in place and be familiar with. Yeah.
Yeah, to jump on that, you said it's correct. Companies need to have the right tools and also to have the right implementation, because sometimes they're just getting the tools for the sake of getting the tools and just ticking the compliance box, and potentially the implementation is not well baked within the pipeline of the workflow that they have with the developers. The developers are just having that tool they don't know how to use because they didn't have that onboarding process awareness around that. There's also in the pipeline having a good triage process for the vulnerabilities and having that understanding. And we're going back to awareness and education. So also for the company side is to have that understanding. Is it the right tool for them? Have they implemented perfectly within their workflow and pipeline? They really understand the developers' needs as well, and the education, obviously, on that side.
Yeah, just maybe to come back to the test part, because I think in especially large enterprise, large company, you unfortunately have a lot of code that has been touched for years, and developers are like so afraid to just upgrade the dependency and that it will break the whole production. So it becomes like a really hard issue. But I think it's tough to say like what's a good strategy, because it depends really of your company, your maturity on DevOps practices, and actually the effort you're ready to make to also shift to a more modern, I would say, DevOps environment. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think whatever strategy you choose, you need to help developers automating. Either it's like upgrading dependency on what other SCA vendors like now are trying to do, just trying to update a patch of the code without touching the whole dependency. But yeah, I think it's at the end of the day, the developers, they don't want to manually check and upgrade and want as much as automation as they can have.
Yeah, no, I agree, Eric. Like if I think back over like the last couple of years, like updating dependencies is usually fine these days, except when it's OTel, but that's a whole different story. But everything else, like I don't think we've seen many issues. I think the open source community at large has gotten really, really good, right? Like they have good test coverage. Upgrading dependencies usually a no-op, in my opinion. There are always these counter examples, right, where you have to be careful, but yeah.
Yeah, I mostly agree on, especially when on open source projects that are maintained, it's definitely, I totally share that point of view. But I was more talking about like legacy enterprise code that's untrained. And I think it's why when you think about it, a lot of large enterprises are spending so much money on SCA tools to these vulnerabilities, because they are afraid to just upgrade the dependencies.
And that's where it comes back to the journey that Kayla mentioned, right? Like it is a journey. You can't just expect someone to update their old mainframe or like 10-year-old Java application to the latest and greatest. That's not going to work. But people have to realize this needs to start now, so that you can stay secure, become more secure over time.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing, and I think is great, is to kind of focus this first part of the conversation on having our security focus on like what's happening with the developers of external tools, or the third-party open source that we are pulling in, which I think is great. And then what Eric is talking about is like, how are we also building up that security and developer relationship internally within our own teams and our own company to make sure that we are having people do the right thing and having the right thing be the easy thing. So maybe we could talk about this in terms of processes that you see, and maybe SBOM start to fit in here. It's like, so who's responsible for the SBOM in terms of maintaining it, understanding it, making it actionable? Same with testing or scanning. Like, let's take this in terms of like, how do we actually implement some of these security practices and make them consumable for our developer teams? Anyone want to take that one? Okay, nobody wants to take that one.
I can start maybe. Not a lot of experience, just on the theoretical like level, and reading up on the Salsa papers, and of course clients asking for stuff, and we see things happening. We have in CircleCI we have this concept called orbs, and we see like orbs that are using Salsa related tooling. But I feel that for maybe less mature organizations like startups, smaller teams, into scaling up, my ideal vision would be like just switching a toggle in the platform or in the system that kind of automatically or semi-automatically starts adding these things, these functionalities into your supply chain. And I think, like Eric said, make it easy for the developer. So the awareness should be there. Of course, what is this thing doing? And it's kind of like adding functionality and adding value to your supply chain, but not maybe having to understand all the detailed implementations, but just it's like almost like a feature that you can enable, and then your supply chain will make use of it, and you get the right warnings and stuff when it's needed. And that's kind of my vision, where I think this becomes more of a commodity almost, and the value really becomes apparent, because it's a volume game. I think you need to do it in a lot of places, everywhere, to really get the value out of it.
Yeah, and in my experience, what we see right now is that a lot of people are looking into things like provenance, and we've mentioned SALSA and SBOMs, and they question the value in these things, right? And like when I take a step back and look at these attestations, in of itself, they aren't really valuable. It is kind of, what are you doing with that data, right? That's kind of like, where do you store that data? Where do you make it available to your internal community of developers, security practitioners, and other people? So if something like XZ comes along, you can really quickly search your SBOM database to like, where are we affected potentially? And just having an SBOM in a CI pipeline isn't going to help you with that, right? You still need to scramble and kind of collect all the data and run this on a big JSON blob. So it's all about like, where do you put that data, and how do you make that data available to like downstream processes? Patching, just observability, right? I think previously we've spoken about like this maturity model of supply chain, where people move from like flying blind, not knowing anything about what they have, what they are running where, towards like observability, and then remediation, and then control and enforcement. So we are still at that phase of like moving people from flying blind towards observability, and they need tools to do that. So where do you store your SBOMs? Where do you make your provenance information available? And that to me is kind of, or to us at Docker, is currently the main focus, right? Like we have this large database of like images on Hub, and like, how do we make this information that sits in all these images available to everyone? So next time something comes along, they can react really quickly. So observability is really key. And then of course, we want to make that process turnkey. So enabling this for people should just be a flip of a switch, right? And I agree with Olaf here that should really be part of your CI/CD pipeline. But what's more important, once you've done that, you're not done, right? You need to figure out, what do you do with the data? That's the key question.
Yeah.
Can I ask what database you're using to make it accessible for people?
Yeah, you can ask, definitely. Actually, that is a moving target. Like we're moving from graph database to. So one of the things that we've learned is people have probably heard about Guac, the kind of like the graph database of like all the software artifacts and packages. Back at Atomist about like 10 years ago, we started on a journey to kind of build exactly that, and then Google came out with something very similar. So we have that within Docker, our own implementation of this, and we're moving more and more towards like in total attestations, like an attestation store where things are signed and verifiable. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much what is in the attestation, but just making these attestations kind of discoverable and kind of giving that to, let's say, policy engines or downstream processes is really what we are focusing on right now.
I like that.
Yeah, that's also where I see like the value add in CI/CD. We see more and more, like, because of mono repos and all the added complexity in the logic, conditional logic of how pipelines are being run. You see like these multiple workflows that kind of trigger each other. And if you can kind of automatically make sure that every output is signed and every input of every part of your tool chain or your supply chain is also checking then you at least know that what goes in the next step is the same thing that went out in the step before. And that's already like super valuable, I think.
Yeah, and so I think like the conditional pipelines is an interesting one. I think that also ties into like general fragmentation of the tool chain at all. Does anyone have any thoughts on just general security fragmentation and how we can address that?
Yeah, I think one of the solutions might be making sure that you have implemented these salsa related tooling transparently, to at least assure that inputs and outputs are checked and are signed off, etc.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge for security teams and developers is to have all of those siloed tools actually making like a single pane of glass, to have everything actually gather at one place. So I would say this is the main challenge. I would say for the tools to look at if there's any integrations, as long as you can have that flow, at least if you can aggregate everything within one of the tool, like for example, Seams, just to have that visibility. It might not be the best solution, but just to make sure that the integration is part of your pipeline, and also it can respond or be attached to other tools within this pipeline at least. And it would make sense to developers, not only for the security team. That's it.
Any other thoughts here?
Yeah, I think it's I join Christian on the idea of the SBOM, especially if you think about a company that have multiple CI/CD system or multiple VCS. Like, even if it seems easy to implement on one repo a CI job that will actually build the SBOM, like if you have like 3,000 repositories, 3 CI/CD system, like the idea of collecting everything and being able to know what packages am I using and search for vulnerability becomes like, yeah, it's not so easy to do, and it's not so easy to do to build like do-it-yourself solution on top of that. And that's where like definitely the vendors and the industry can bring value, and yeah, I think it's great to like build it to create a CI job just to create the SBOM, but at some point you also have to collect everything and to have a holistic view for especially for bigger companies.
And as you mentioned, also if we sorry. If we do actually collect all of the vulnerabilities, there might be also a little bit of a fatigue with all the vulnerabilities, because the developers might not understand which one they need to solve first, or if they're actually fixing that vulnerability, will it be solved in every repos, or if we talk about monorepo or microservices, they might have different challenges for each of the ecosystems. So also having a good understanding and good triaging systems coming from the vendors, also just to have that better visibility and understanding of the if fixing one vulnerabilities, it will fix others in different projects.
Yeah,
signal and noise is a huge one.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. It's just signal and noise is a huge one. I think for developers being able to participate in the security world is trying to help them navigate that. But I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I tend to agree with Sonia. She was talking about the single pane of glass. In my experience, context switching is really killing adoption. If you're like on a deadline, or there's a stressful situation where something is really critical and needs to be patched or fixed, and you need to like switch around in different terminals and screens, mistakes will happen. People will really burn out quickly, and yeah, having these things in a single pane of glass makes a ton of sense. But then you get the noise thingy, because if there's like tons of red things blinking, you're like, whoa. And I actually saw people like closing windows at some point somewhere, and I'm like, just people like over flooding with negative information, and we're humans, fight, flight, or freeze.
I think on that point, I think it's important for the security team to sit down with the developer and better introduce and implement the tool. So not putting everything by default, is just understanding the workflow already in use in the company, and then you can fine tune the thresholds. Not putting gates from the start. Also having that understanding of the workflow, because otherwise the adoption from the developer, no, I don't want to use this tool because it's actually blocking us from pushing to production. So having those discussions and awareness and better understanding of the tool just show the added value would be a better buy-in for the developers, I'd say.
I think too, on this topic in particular, one of the trends that we're starting to see too is as security has become more prevalent and more of a concern and a focus area for businesses and enterprises, those platform eng development teams and their security teams really aligning on shared goals and values of what do we have to achieve at the business level and how can we do that together. So it's not just, okay, we went and bought this security tool, here, this is how it's going to be implemented, but actually, what are we trying to build and achieve, and what are the security and compliance, milestones that we have to meet to do that for it, whatever we're trying to achieve, whether it's security for our users, to meet a compliance milestone, whatever that end business goal is. And we're starting to see that more and more, that conversation meld, and that, CISO, CTO coming together and road mapping together. And I think that's what we're going to see, a real transition over the next few years. And I'm hopeful for it, because I think it will get away from one, too many tools that don't have enough integration and don't work together as we thought we would. But then also, our developers saying, this is getting in my way from building the next great thing. So I'm going to bypass it and I'm going to go do this so that it doesn't interrupt my workflow. And instead, let's bring tools together that achieve both of those goals. And that's something, I've seen over the last 2 years working at Chainguard, like the industry is making great strides there and the technology is moving in that way too. And, Christian talked about it earlier, like in the container space and container security, how we're thinking about building software with attestation, with SBOMs in there from the jump. Like, I don't think we can fix everything that happened in the past, but we can make it a better future for what we're building.
Yeah. So I think one of the themes that have kind of come through everything that we've talked about in terms of topics and all of your responses is making sure that the right and secure thing to do is also the easy things for our development teams to do. So maybe as we kind of close up this panel, do we have any final thoughts that we can do? So understanding that DevSecOps, if we want to use that term, is a culture thing and a tool thing, and they all kind of have to feed each other. Is there one kind of actionable takeaway that we can give to people listening to this in terms of what they could do to actually improve that relationship? Is it a tool or a practice they can think about? Is there some kind of cultural practice that you would really lean into? Like, where is an investment area that people you think would get bang for their buck?
I think Sonia was mentioning awareness, and I think it starts from awareness. And it's a pull mechanism instead of a push. So if you create awareness with engineers, with developers, they will start asking for certain functionality or tooling in their platform. And then we're talking about developer experience, because they're like, I saw this thing and it would be super useful to have, because if I don't have it, bad things can happen. And my colleague told me it's easy to apply because they're using it in their team, and then you get this pull effect. And I think without the awareness first, then all the tooling in the world will not be as effective as it can be.
Yeah, I would say, as you mentioned, Olaf, education and awareness is the most important. Just to explain the why are we doing this, or just to also showcase potentially a vulnerability and the impact that it might have in a company if it happens. Just to showcase all of this and just to have that understanding mechanisms is more important.
Yeah, on my side, I think also there is like a difference between when you look at code security vulnerability and you think about vulnerability dependencies. So SCI actually, when the developer is coding and creating a new application, is not responsible for the vulnerability. It's more indirect, it comes from the outside. But if you look at SAST or or secret detection, putting secrets in code, actually it's like at the bottom of it, it's a human mistake. So it's easier actually to responsibilize the developers to write more secure code, and for that you have to be close to the developers, meaning you have to give him tools in his own workflow. So either a CLI tool, pre-commit, or in the IDE, really close to where he's working. But also, like, as we talk about, like, awareness and education, why it's bad to do a SQL injection, or why it's bad to put the secrets in code. So it's a mix of everything, but the core of it is like you need to show that you are making this person a better engineer, a better developer, and also like bring value without impacting the productivity and velocity. So I think that's the key message. It's really hard to do, to be fairly honest on this side, and especially because when you think about it, you have more and we talk a little bit about it, is like you have the future and you have the past. So we start at GitGuardian is we call it stop the bleeding. So the first point is like of fixing the issue is prevention. So it's avoiding having more issues. But one of the biggest challenges is like, okay, you do an initial scan for any type of vulnerability. It could be SaaS, could be SCA, it could be secret detection. Like, you will find tons of issue, and how, like, where do you start? Like, so you start with prioritization. After you can limit the number of problems, but you still have a huge amount of problems to solve, and you need to dispatch it. And I think that's where, like, the real work began. And to do that, you need to responsibilize people. You have like one security engineer for 100 developers. So that's why we put up shift left in place, so we can offload a bit of the work from the security team to the developers. And yeah, I think it's a constant fight with multiple for security teams. Like, the goal of solution or for vendors of tools is just actually give them tools to fulfill this mission. When you think about it, to fulfill this mission of decreasing the number of vulnerabilities, and it takes multiple ways, and it's hard to do, to be
Yeah, one of the things that, we like to say at Chainguard is, we were shifting left, but actually we should just start at the left. Let's make the tools that developers reach for secure by default from the start, so that we can take that burden off of, that shifting left and putting security onus on a development team because there's a small security team. But actually, if we can start from that secure by default place, then we're eliminating classes of vulnerabilities before they become a thing that you have to deal with later on. And so I fully agree, Eric. I think it's about, education and awareness, but also, giving and getting the tools in place to stop the bleeding and keep teams building and producing the next great thing.
Any final thoughts, Christian?
I'm just trying to kind of find something to add to this. What my previous panelists said. I don't think I have anything to add right now.
Yeah, Eric in particular really nailed it with that answer.
He brought us home.
Well, panel, thank you so much for all of the expertise and wisdom that you shared with us today. I think that I really got a lot out of this, and I hope that our audience did as well. And I really appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.